what do you see as the largest risk for the banking system, and what do you think may cause the next financial crisis? I'll start with James.
Largest risk for the banking sector. Well, if you look at what causes banking crises, it's always got some sort of asset quality property type link at the front end of it. So I guess we would always be looking out for some sort of shock to property markets. I think the one thing that is still very, perhaps I'll throw it out there because it's as good a point to bring it up as any though, is the one thing that we still see very clearly is that, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, is the sovereign bank link hasn't really been disentangled. And I'll take it from the sort of the bank angle, so the risk to banks from being overexposed to the sovereign, whereas earlier we talked about it the other way round. That's still a big deal. It's probably the biggest impediment to this so-called banking union, having banks still extremely exposed to their sovereigns. Around about 6% of their assets on average is to home country sovereign debt, and that will be in excess of equity because banks don't tend to have more than 6% of their assets funded by equity. So clearly where you have downside risks in sovereign, James talked a little bit about Italy earlier as being a country that we have rated BBB on negative outlook. Banks still have very large exposures. Clearly you can see that as a potential source of risk, and then where you get one, you worry about contagion. So we still worry about that sort of issue, certainly banking debt and bank exposure to sovereign, and that transmission mechanism through to the banking sector of risk.
It doesn't have to be that the next crisis is similar to the last crisis. This is extremely important. I mean, I'm frequently also asked, well, what will the next financial crisis look like? But who says it's the next financial crisis that will cause problems? We could have a recession for reasons that are totally unrelated to the financial system. At the moment, most of my time goes with talk about trade war. You could, in the most extreme case, have a recession just because of a trade war. So in that case, that would have nothing to do with the banking sector. The banking sector is a very highly regulated and in a much better place, globally speaking, than what it was 10 years ago. So maybe the next thing that investors should worry about is not so much the financial system. It really is much more that there could come a crisis for all other reasons, including, again, trade war, China slowdown. It could be the dollar going up or down, depending on what your view is. So in that sense, there are many things outside of financial crisis that can cause a recession, which ultimately for investors is really what they should worry most about, because whenever I have a recession, US stocks go down on average about 30%. So if the question is, what should I watch if I worry about the stock market or risky assets, or in that matter, credit spreads widening out? Well, you should not only be watching the financial institutions, you should probably be watching much more what are all the sources of risks. And again, the trade war, unfortunately, I would say, has come in on the radar screen quite quickly here in the last few weeks, which is, of course, then the risk that we all are worrying most about at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. Geopolitics is probably the highest risk that we have right now and the biggest worry for all of us. From a banking perspective, the next financial crisis will probably not, hopefully, for the reasons we've mentioned, will probably not be as severe as the big one that we've just seen through, and there will have to be some sort of correction. There will be some credit losses, maybe deeper losses that will take us into a deeper recession because there is no systemic risk, and therefore we should not expect such a strong intervention from central banks in terms of rescuing the financial sector. But I think that's part of the cycles. I don't see a big looming crisis that will be a one-off in a century coming up. But I do agree that geopolitics is probably the biggest risk.
Yeah.
Well, for me, clearly geopolitics plays a role. I cannot pinpoint to something very intrinsic for banks or for financial institutions that would be a good reason to foresee a financial crisis very shortly. The one worry that we have, however, it's not a high worry, is that the prolonged high liquidity in the market might influence the documentation standards and hence the positions that banks have in safeguarding the good risk management in the market. But this is more of a underlying worry. It's not a big thing that would trigger a crisis at all.
Yeah, I remember speaking with the CEO of Barclays, Jeff Staley, and he said him and his top team were absolutely sure that there will be another financial crisis, but they were sure that this time it wasn't going to come from within the banking system. So I guess we'll see in time whether he's right.